Please welcome your panel on Stand in Your Power, the Mindful Way, moderated by founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, James Doty.
I think we need to go in front here. How is everyone? Come on, you can do better. Yeah! Shall we begin? Well, listen, I want to thank all of you for being with us today. And I'm really privileged to be with our panelists. And I'm going to start and give a little overview about how this manifested and sort of the situation we're in today as humans, if you will. And then we will have an introduction. And then we will start with Dan and then go through the different panelists who will give us an overview of how these types of practices have had an effect on their lives, the lives of others around them, and sort of the work that they're doing today. From my own background, and I have founded this center at Stanford 10 years ago, where we actually examine the neuroscience of compassion and altruism and the physiologic effects from that. And we've actually developed a mental training practice called Compassion Cultivation Training, which has mindfulness components, but it overtly includes self-compassion and compassion for others. And we'll talk about these other practices as well. But how I got into this, because I'm actually a neurosurgeon at Stanford, and oftentimes people don't think of neurosurgeons as compassionate or as meditators. Would that be true? So I'm an aberration, basically. So what we are seeing today in modern society is an epidemic of stress, anxiety, and depression. And this is certainly true in the context of high-performing individuals. And it's interesting, there's a quote that Mark Twain said, and it said, "I have had many great troubles, but most of them never happened." And therein lies the problem. Because if you look at our evolution as a species, our DNA has not changed in the last 200,000 years. We are the exact same individual as we were on the savannah in Africa. And we are maximized to live in that environment, but we're not maximized to live in this environment. And as a result, and all of you I'm sure appreciate that evolution does not create perfection. You simply need to look in the mirror, right? As a result, we have certain habits, behaviors that in some ways are wired into us that actually impact us negatively functioning in the modern world. Now let me ask you a question. How many of you have a negative dialogue going on in your head? The others who did not raise your hand, you were lying. And the reason I say that is that negative things have a tendency to stick to us, negative events, negative statements, because that's how we survive, because negative things put us at risk. And as a result, for many of us, we have this ongoing negative dialogue that creates stress and anxiety. The other aspect is that there was a study that showed that the vast majority of the time in your head is not being present. Do you know what you're doing? You are ruminating about what might have happened, what should have happened, what could have happened, or you're thinking about a future that has not yet occurred. And that's where most of us spend our time. Yet, we know from a neuroscience perspective that the way you connect with others, the way you are authentic has an absolute requirement that you be present. And therein lies the problem of how do we create presence. And one of the ways we have found to do that, and it's interesting because I sat in on a cannabis discussion. I sat in on a discussion about psychedelics. How many of you have used cannabis or psychedelics? You're all lying, all of you probably. But the reason I bring that up is we are finding that psychedelics, cannabis, in some situations can decrease stress, anxiety, depression potentially. But we also have found through neuroscience that in fact we can create brain training exercises, and some of them actually that were developed thousands of years ago in the context of religious practice that actually allow us to be present, to be authentic, and when we're in that mode, our physiology works its best. So we're going to talk first. I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves and a little bit about that background briefly. Then I'm going to have some directed questions. Then we'll have a little bit of a dialogue, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end, if that's okay. Okay. So I think we'll just start here on my right. Sure. Neville Crawley.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, Neville Crawley. I'm the CEO of Kiva.org, a fairly well-known crowdfunding platform. So we make microloans of typically $1,000 or less to people at the very bottom of the economic pyramid. And those loans are crowdfunded in $25 increments from folks just like you. So it's incredible the power that something like that can have to change someone's life. So that's what I'm doing now. I've had a very winding path to get there. I originally trained as a fine artist in the UK. I lived in China for quite a number of years. I lived in the Middle East. I eventually made my way to the US. I ran some technology companies. I worked in the finance industry, and now I do this. But about 5 or 6 years ago, on that journey, I was running a technology company, a private equity-backed technology company, and really not having a great time. And an executive coach that I hired happened to be a meditation teacher, and taught me meditation. And I think we'll come onto this a bit more. But it just fundamentally transformed the way that I live my life, the way that I think about things. And I've continued to run companies and have this very busy life, but also fit a fairly deep Buddhist meditation practice and a more generally a Buddhist practice in with it. And it's an ongoing, it's a work in progress. So thank you.
Our next panelist, Laura Dern, who many of you may know, but I will let her introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Laura Dern, and I have been acting since I was 11. Both my parents are actors, so I was raised in a family business. And we were speaking about it this morning. I think for me, one of the incredible gifts and unexpected gifts of my life as an actor is that in order to perform at the highest level in the workplace environment, I have to be mindful. So I'm being asked to be present in the moment, available, and have empathy. And it's a wonderful place to learn about your shadow side, because we know that that's incredibly hard work to come from that place. But I do have the great good fortune of, in a way, having it enforced in the workplace. And I think my art is the thing that's teaching me about my own humanity and service and hopefully my ability to be more empathetic and connected. And so along that path, I have been lucky to come across extraordinary people, and starting at 17, found the practice of transcendental meditation, which has been a great gift in my life and in my work in terms of being in the moment. And I would say that all these roads lead to the larger question of how any of us can be of service in our homes, in our lives, and therefore as activists. And so that's also become a big part of my journey, both in creating content as a producer now and also just as a citizen, particularly in this country of the United States. As of late, there's lots of work to be done.
We'll try and stay away from politics.
Well, we have to be mindful within it somehow.
Yes. George?
Hi, my name is George Mumford, and my name of my company is Eye of the Hurricane, and I'm pretty overwhelmed right now because I've been doing this for 30 years in the closet, and now I'm out. And I don't mean to, say being in the closet is not a, it's not a kind of like, I'm not saying that lightly. I'm just saying that I feel like the fact that we're doing this, I'm so grateful that we're able to do this, because this process is powerful. It's extremely powerful. And in my case, I'm coming up on 35 years of being clean and sober. And so how I dealt with life was through substances. I was a basketball player and I got injured. And of course, when I stopped playing basketball, I didn't know who I was. And then I got into drugs a lot. And so when I got clean, I found mindfulness. And then I had to deal with the fact that I had chronic pain. So I had to deal with the pain without using medication. So maybe it would be nice if I said, well, I found this because I was seeking it. No, I wasn't seeking it. It was out of necessity. And once I found it, I went from surviving to thriving. And then what I chose to do is share it with other people, because the only way for me to keep it is to give it away. And so one of the things I found is when I was able to be still and know is that I got a masterpiece inside of me. And that all I had to do is chip away to let that masterpiece come out. Now, some of us might call that Buddha nature. Some people might call that Christ consciousness or Kuan Yin energy or divine spark. Martin Buber would call it the divine spark. I don't care what you call it. I'm sitting here with a whole bunch of masterpieces. I'm sitting here with masterpieces. That's what I see. And so when I work with people from Yale to jail, locker room to boardrooms, don't matter. As long as you got a mind and body, I can work with you. I'm not trying to fix anybody. All I'm trying to do is help them be the unique greatness, help that masterpiece unfold. And so this process is really helpful, and that's what I'm doing. So people want to know what game I'm playing Pursuing Excellence with Grace and Ease. That's what I'm doing. And I can talk a lot because I've been around for a minute, but it's good to be home again because I've been involved with the Lakers. They won 5 NBA championships, and I was part of that. I feel really good about that. Of course, I was part of the Chicago Bulls 3 there, so I got 8 rings.
So you need 2 more.
Well, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but that ain't really on me. All I got to do is show up. If the rings come, they come. And the best way to win a ring is not to want to get one, is to allow it to happen.
And that's interesting because the nature of attachment, which causes suffering, actually. Dan.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Dan Siegel, and I'm a psychiatrist here in Los Angeles. And I work in a field called interpersonal neurobiology, where we combine all the fields of science into one framework to understand the nature of reality, including the nature of the mind and mental health. We apply interpersonal neurobiology in all sorts of fields, and one of those fields is in the training of the mind. Another is in the field of parenting. And so we basically look at things in a way what I'll describe in just a few moments, a little differently than other fields might, because we've combined it all into one framework, and I'll get into details in a moment. And it's an honor to be here with all of you and with everyone on the panel.
Hi, I'm Donna Karan, and I've started a company called Urban Zen. Where do you find the calm in the chaos? And that started through my life as losing a tremendous amount of people in my life and have died. And my husband, when he passed, he said, Donna, whatever you do, take care of the nurses and doctors. So I had been doing yoga and meditation and all that since I was 16, 17 years old, and that's how my bodysuit started, because I was doing the body work. And what happened there is I realized, where was the care in healthcare? So I had all my woo-woos my whole life, and my husband, I'd have like candles lighting, meditation, the oils and all that, and he goes, you and your woo-woos go over there, until he needed them. You know, when he had cancer for 7 years, he needed help and support. And I spent my life at Sloan Kettering Hospital. And I saw what the nurses were going through. And it was so hard to watch. They give of their life and they give everything of themselves to the patient. So with that, we had a 10-day forum at Urban Zen, which Rachel, who brought me here today, was very much a part of starting it. And we all sat there and looked at the healthcare system. Where was the care in healthcare? So with that, we created the Urban Zen Integrative Therapist, and they are trained in in-bed yoga, Reiki, aromatherapy, nutrition, and palliative care. So when you have that one person, they could take the job of being with the patient, being with the nurse, being with the doctor, and being with the loved one who is sitting next to that patient who really needs the help and support. This has been a very, very long journey, and I am so honored to be here because it's been a fight. I'm not going to tell you it hasn't, but the world of healthcare is for every single human being in the world. Everybody's touched by it. Nobody gets away with it. And this is not about me, it's about we, that we all come together to create this change in healthcare. And I'm so honored to be on this panel, truly, and I thank you.
Thank you. So before Dan starts, I want to share something else about myself. And then actually, I'm going to have, George, if you would, he will lead us in a brief meditation. So I mentioned being a neurosurgeon, and I was also an entrepreneur. But my path to meditation actually goes back much further. I actually grew up in poverty with a father who was an alcoholic, a mother who was chronically depressed. She'd had a stroke and was paralyzed. She attempted suicide multiple times. And of course, this is not an environment typically associated with thriving in life. And in fact, in those types of environment, what happens to so many people is they are maximally stressed. Living in that environment is a form of what becomes post-traumatic stress disorder, because there's chaos around you. And the blessing that happened to me was, at the age of 12, I walked into a magic shop. And the owner wasn't there, but his mother was there. And she knew nothing about magic, except magic of the mind, if you will. And over this, her and I began talking, and over about 20 or 30 minutes, she looked at me and she said, you know, and the thing about her was, have you met people who have like a radiant presence? They just smile, you feel safe. This idea of psychological safety. They're not judging you. They're embracing you. They are accepting of you. And this was this woman. And for this period of time, in this brief interaction, I felt calm, I felt relaxed. I felt that actually I could be my true self. How many of you have a projection of how you want people to see you? And this is the problem, because that projection isn't necessarily authentic, and it guards you against opening your heart. And so for me, I was able to relax, be calm, and she said to me after about 20 minutes, she said, I really like you. And this was actually somewhat unusual in my life. And she said, if you come here every day for the next 6 weeks, I'll teach you something that I think could change your life. And the extraordinary thing that happened was I showed up. And she taught me about the stress that was in my body that was characterized by my muscles being tight, looking around all the time. And she taught me a breathing exercise. She taught me that this dialogue that was going on in my head was actually not real, it was a construct. and then she taught me to be kind to myself. So many of us treat ourselves worse than we treat anyone we know. We are not kind to ourselves. We're not self-accepting. Oftentimes, people have a hard time even taking a compliment because they feel they don't deserve it. And they live with this, and this causes an immense amount of suffering. And so she made me realize that, because if you're a fish in dirty water, until you see what clean water is, you don't even know you're in dirty water. And she made me see a different way, a different perspective. And then she taught me not only to be self-compassionate, which there's now a lot of science behind, but also understanding that when I'm so beating up myself, that it's hard for me to look out in the world and be compassionate and kind. And so in some ways, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about a choice. The choice that sometimes we make unintentionally to live in fear, or the choice to go down the path of love. And coming from a neurosurgeon, that's probably a pretty unusual statement, right? But that is indeed the case. So George, could you lead us in that meditation?
Sure. So I'd like to set it up by thinking about it in this way, that we're actually going on a journey. So how many of you have meditated or have meditation practices? That's great. So what I would like us to do today for this exercise is to act like you don't have a practice, and see if you can bring a beginner's mind into just following the instructions and see what happens. So I know I'm asking people to be vulnerable, but I don't know how you get power without being vulnerable. So here's the idea. So the idea is to realize that being a human being, or being here in this room, is something to be grateful for. And so we can think about setting our mind up in an attitude of gratitude or sense of adventure. And if you're not able to do that, if you just smile, that's going to change the chemistry. And so once we do that, that's kind of like the preparation for this. And then the next thing is to just listen to the instructions. And we're not trying to go anywhere or do anything. This is more about just being. I'm going to ask you to do what you're already doing, but I'm going to ask you to pay attention to it. So for instance, how many people notice you're sitting down? Okay, how do you know that? Because you can feel it, right? So all I'm going to ask you to do is just to tune into your body. I call it being in the body. And just focus on the fact that you're sitting, and if you're comfortable closing your eyes, and just start out by taking a few deeper in and out breaths. So the belly breathing is really helpful. And the idea is to just focus on the fact, on the breath. You can feel yourself sitting and breathing, and that's it. So as you breathe in, you can feel your whole body. You can feel where your body is making contact with the floor, the chair. You might notice where your hands are. The idea is to sit up in a dignified manner, so you're not rigid, but you're not slouching, that you're sitting upright. You're able to feel that masterpiece that's inside. And just tuning in and breathing out. And when your mind, or when you get involved in sounds other than the sound of my voice, or thoughts or images, especially thoughts, just noticing the thoughts, the thinking is happening, and just by thinking about your body, thinking about the breath, that's where your attention goes. I'll give you an example of that. If I ask you to think about your right palm, your attention goes to your right palm. If I ask you to go to your left palm, your attention goes there. So when it goes there, to just notice what's there. So the concept is the body and the breath, but then to drop down below the concept and just feel the sensations that are there. So it's not thinking, it's feeling. So the thought gets you there. It's what I would call directed thought. But then once you land, just being with the breath, being with the body as you breathe in and breathe out. So the simple fact that we're sitting and breathing and we're aware of it, we know it. And we know it not by thinking about it, but by feeling it, by experiencing the breath as we breathe in. You can feel the whole body. As we breathe out, we can feel the whole body. And we can allow sounds or thoughts to be like background music in a restaurant. Just let it be. So we're not trying to push it away or move it away, or to judge ourselves, I can't do this because my mind is all over the place. That's called welcome to reality. Just notice it and let it be. And just rest in the breath, rest in the body. And it's not about being able to do it, it's the intention to do it, and the intention, or once you notice that you're not with the body and the breath, just by thinking about it, you're there. And even if it's just for a slight second, the idea is to just come back and begin again. Just allowing any sounds to come in to just be there. And as we drop down into the body and we just are being still and knowing it, you might notice once in a while that there's a sound of silence. It'd be low or above all of the noise and the thoughts. There's a quiet place. And if you're not able to close your eyes and just focus on one spot and just not be engaged in thoughts, images or thoughts, just to feel the body as you breathe in and breathe out, and recognizing that you are sitting, and you can prove that because you can feel what it feels like when you're in the seated posture. We'll take a few more moments of just breathing in and breathing out while sitting. And when you're ready, just opening your eyes.
Thank you, George. How do you all feel? I like that. So Dan and I had talked earlier, and Dan's going to sort of give us an overview of some of the mind-brain connections and how they relate to these mental practices.
Yeah. So we have this wonderful opportunity with a panel with 6 people, so there's a lot to say. So I'll begin by just pointing out some take-home messages, and the Milken Institute has offered the period today from 1:30 to 2:30 if you want to dive into a practice called the Wheel of Awareness in the Wellness Garden. I'll be there, and if you want to dive more deeply, we can do that. So that's today, 1:30 to 2:30 in the Wellness Garden. Essentially, how many of you would say that you have a mind?
I'm glad everyone raised their hand.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's a very interesting issue because what George just beautifully led us through was a way to strengthen your mind. And yet we also have a neuroscientist, a neurosurgeon on the panel, and we also know that what you just went through, if you did this regularly, would change not only the activity of your brain in your head, but it would change the structure of the brain in a positive way. So what I'm going to do is give you the fastest overview. I've been given 5 minutes to give you an overview of all of the science of mind training practices that would fall under the word meditation. And so it's going to seem very condensed, but we're going to start with the word mind. The first thing to say is that in the various fields that study the mind, there is no definition of the mind. This is just a strange thing about that word. Most of you said you have one, and yet no one seems to be defining it. So in the field of interpersonal neurobiology, we actually make a definition of the mind, and it's a long story, so I'm just going to say that it has to do with where energy is flowing. And what George just beautifully walked us through was a way to learn to use attention, which is that process of the mind that can direct energy flow. And sometimes that energy is pure energy, blah, 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 and sometimes it's energy in a certain formation that symbolizes something, like if I say conference, right? That is a symbol that is energy in formation, so it's information. Okay, so energy and information changes, so it's called flow. Attention is that process that directs it. So the first take-home message is this: where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. Where attention goes is how you use your mind to direct it, like in a practice we just did. It gets neurons to fire in particular regions, and it's really not so much where in the brain, but how in the brain, and how they're intercommunicating with each other. And where that intercommunication happens over time strengthens the connection of something called neuroplasticity. The second take-home message, besides this where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows, is that what we do with the mind has been shown to actually transform 6 things which I'd like you to memorize. So get ready. The 3 kinds of practices that science has studied from contemplative practices from ancient times have been divided into 3 kinds. You did the first kind, which is training focused attention. And beginning with the breath is a beautiful way to do that. The second pillar of mind training is called opening awareness, or open awareness. And I think it would relate, George, to what you beautifully talk about the eye of the hurricane. So you can basically, in our field, interpersonal neurobiology, begin the process of integrating consciousness, is the way we would say it, where you're differentiating the knowing of being aware in the eye of the hurricane, or in our case it's a wheel, the hub of the wheel, from the hurricane itself, which would be the rim, all the stuff, the thoughts that keep on coming at you. People who cannot differentiate the hub from the rim, to just stay with that metaphor, become fused with their thoughts. And if the thoughts, as Jim was suggesting, are negative, then you believe the nonsense going on in your head, right? So the first step is to then focus attention, open awareness, that's the second pillar. And the third pillar is that you develop what I call kind intention, which is really this loving, kind, compassionate, positive regard toward the inner experience of oneself and the inner experience of others. Okay, so those are the 3 pillars that science has studied. Focused attention, open awareness, kind intention training. And these are trainings that you can do. At Stanford, there's a wonderful program that Jim has created called CCARE, which studies these practices. Okay, here are the 6 things I want you to memorize. If you were to do these 3 pillar practices, what are they? Focused attention, opening, and developing kind intention. Excellent. This is what research shows. Let's start with the head brain. Your brain will become more integrated. What that means, and I won't get into the details, is the different areas of the brain will become more linked both functionally and structurally. And the Smith et al. Paper in 2015 demonstrated that the more integrated your brain is, the happier and healthier you are. That's summarizing like tons of research in one sentence. An integrated brain is awesome. These practices create it. If there was a pill that did this, you would say, oh my God, let me invest in the company, and you would start taking that pill every day. Well, there is, and it's these 3 pillar practices. So the first thing is it integrates the brain. Good. Now here are the 5 things that happen beyond the head brain inside your whole body that research has shown that are so mind-blowing that if they weren't in the most rigorous peer-reviewed journals, you would be right to say, oh, that sounds like nonsense.
Or woo-woo.
Or woo-woo. But this is what we've shown as a scientific community, that when you do 3 pillar practices using the mind, just the mind, no pills, no anything, no technology, just the mind, in a disciplined way, focusing attention, opening awareness, and cultivating kind intention, this is what you get. Number 1, you're going to reduce the stress hormone cortisol. So how many of you would like to reduce stress? Let's see. Okay, so what's the first physiological thing? Reducing cortisol, reducing stress. Number 2, you're going to optimize cardiovascular risk factors, meaning you're going to lower cholesterol, and if you have high blood pressure, you're going to be able to lower it to a certain degree, and you're going to allow the heart to communicate with the head brain. There's a brain around the heart too, but you have these communications of the heart with the head brain will be much more balanced. So that's cardiovascular health. So the second one is you're going to improve cardiovascular health. Excellent. Number 3 is you're going to actually make the immune system that fights infections more robust. So immunity will be improved. So you're improving which kind of system? The immune system. Great. I'm going to test you in a few moments. And then number 4, and this is the most mind-blowing when it came out, is you are going to alter the degree of inflammation in the body. How? With what you do with your mind actually changes these non-DNA molecules sitting on the top of the genes. These are called epi, means on top of genetic regulators, histones and methyl groups. You're going to optimize the epigenetic regulation to decrease inflammation. And we now know that inflammation is one of the major causes of life-threatening diseases. So you're going to change epigenetic regulation to reduce what? Inflammation. Excellent. And number 5, if that wasn't enough, number 5 is that you will optimize the level of an enzyme. And I'm telling you, the people who study this, one of them is Elizabeth Blackburn, who I was just with a few days ago, who got the Nobel Prize for this system called telomeres. Telomeres are the ends of your chromosomes. They're like caps on the tips of your shoelace. When the ends of your chromosomes fray with stress and aging, your cells can't divide well, they get sick and they die, and you get sick and die. So anything that optimizes telomeres, the ends of the chromosome, is a good thing, and the way you do that is by optimizing the enzyme that repairs and maintains them, called telomerase, but it's pronounced telomerase. So one of the best ways to optimize telomerase levels is with what's called presence, what Jim was talking about. It's the eye of the hurricane that we talk about, that George phrased that way. It's the hub of the wheel of awareness. The more you cultivate the ability to distinguish the rim from the hub, the more presence you have. And with that presence, you optimize telomerase levels. So when I sent the book to Alyssa Epple, Elizabeth Blackburn's colleague, who wrote this beautiful book called The Telomere Effect, Alyssa wrote me back. She said, Dan, this is a great book. Everything's great, but you left something out. And I go, oh, my God, the book is already, going to the printer. She goes, well, did it go to the printer yet? I go, no. She goes, well, you need to change something. I said, what do I need to change? She goes, you have to not only say it optimizes telomerase levels, but it slows the aging process. So I said, that's audacious. You're telling me the mind and what you do with your mind is going to slow the aging process? That's wild. She goes, you need to say that. I go, but how can I say that? This is the Nobel Prize winner and her colleague saying this. She goes, because we've shown that's what it does. So it optimizes telomerase levels, and with all these things, it slows the aging process. So let's review the 6 things. What does it do to the brain? It makes the brain more integrated. Tell me the 5 things. What does it do to your stress levels? Reduces them. What does it do to your immune system? Optimizes its functioning. What does it do to the cardiovascular system? Optimizes its functioning. What does it do to inflammation? Reduces it. And what does it do to your telomerase levels? Optimizes it so it slows the aging process. Now, how many of you would like to have those 6 things happen to your body? Okay, so then there is no reason not to learn a daily practice. How many of you brush your teeth? Anybody brush your teeth? Well, if you brush your teeth for dental hygiene, this is how you can brush your mind for life hygiene. And there's no reason, after you being in this room for this panel, not to develop a mind training practice that incorporates those 3 pillars. In whatever way you do it, there's lots of different approaches. The wheel of awareness is just one way to do all 3 in one practice, but there's lots of different ways of doing it. They're all great. Find your way that fits with you and do it. And how often you have to do it? If you can, on a regular practice, daily if possible. How long do you need it? Research suggests somewhere about 12 minutes a day is a minimum. And if you say you don't have time to do 12 minutes a day, then do it 24 minutes a day. That's it.
How many people wish you were a student and Dan was your teacher? Wasn't that quite extraordinary? Thank you, Dan, and I think that that was wonderful. But you can see the power of these practices, and what we forget is actually how powerful we really are. And unfortunately, so many of us give that power to other people. And the way we give it to them is listening to critical statements about ourselves. The way we give it to them is not being present. But when you sit and do these practices, you have immense, immense power to not only to change yourself, but actually to change the world for the better. So I'm going to shift over to Neville.
Thank you.
And I think he's going to give us some insights into how he's integrated or incorporated some of these practices into the business environment.
Great, yeah, thank you. So yeah, I've been brushing my teeth for about 6 years now. I don't know what I was thinking before that, but maybe I'll describe a little bit about my practice. And as you know, I think everyone has a different practice. It's a personal practice. I'll describe a little bit about mine, and then a little bit about how I think that influences me as a business leader and the way that we operate Kiva and things like this. So I got into this practice through the Tibetan tradition, which is just a very rich and complex tradition. And I've ended up over the years with quite a simple Zen practice. So Soto Zen, it emphasizes just sitting in, you know, they call bare awareness. And my personal practice, I sit for an hour or two a day, so very clean teeth. And I also focus a lot on just the traditional practice of reading the precepts, listening to the Dharma, and I really think, for me at least, it's kind of all part of the protocol. You know, it all kind of works together. And when I really think about, when I try to describe what I think it's done, and I think talking about these things is hard, right? When you sit there and you meditate, you can feel what it's doing, but it's kind of talking about that experientially is quite hard. In Zen, we would say that talking about it is like a finger pointing at the moon. It's not the moon, you're just kind of pointing at the thing. So, but I really think what it's done for me is allowed me to kind of de-pattern and re-pattern myself. And by de-pattern, we talked about the voice in the head, but there's a whole lot of symbols. You know, like money is a symbol, and a conference is a symbol, and we can kind of get stuck on this symbolic interaction with the world. And symbols are only symbols because we all agree on them. You know, if someone disagrees, then they're not buying into the symbolic system. But for what we're trying to do at Kiva, we're trying to end poverty. We're trying to end financial exclusion, and what's got us here won't get us there. So it's really important that I and we as an organization de-pattern ourselves and start asking questions of, just because someone lives on $2 a day, but what is their life really like? You know, and get curious about that and not make assumptions. $2 a day is a symbol, right? What are they actually living? And you know, and then it prompts to, well, I don't know. So I'm going to go to rural villages and sit with people, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to be present, and I'm going to really understand. And so all of these things, and you know, and we found out, for example, that one of the really important things, it's not just the flow of money. It's actually that people don't have identity, right? And they don't have digitization. So the problem wasn't exactly what we thought it was, but I and we had to de-pattern before we could see the real problem. And then on a personal level, the de-patterning is self-beliefs and whatever. And then techniques, we talked about compassion, or you could say like a meta practice. So currently for a project I'm working on, I need $50 million right now, right, to do a thing. And
if anybody would like to write the check,
yeah, that's right. And so I was working with someone to imagine what it would be like when we got the $50 million. And it would be great. We'd all be much more relaxed. We'd be doing great things in the world. It would be wonderful. And so I have a very sort of visceral program to myself to what that future state will be like. And for the last 2 weeks, as I've walked to work and walked back every day, I've repeated in my mind everyone I've seen to look at them and just say, may you be blessed with $50 million. And but it's really, may you be blessed with this future image that I program myself. And it's just very transformational. I personally believe that the $50 million that I need will come with ease, but it's also reprogramming my attitude, and it's just a very embodied compassion practice. So maybe that's a little bit about how I think this practice can deprogram, both personally and the way that you view what you're doing in the world. And then there are practices to kind of reprogram in a way that's very healthy.
So if I could just comment, what happens for many people is when you're not present, when you're anxious, and there are corporate environments. Have any of you worked in a corporate environment that was not kind? Yes, you have, some of you. I gave a talk at the University of Edinburgh, and I asked this group at it was a business school, how many of you have felt that you were in pain, suffering in your business environment, 150 people, and how many of you felt supported in your work environment? Do you know how many people felt supported? Therein lies the problem. And we know, though, that when we create a compassionate work environment, a thoughtful work environment, one in which there's awareness and presence, there's increased productivity, increased creativity, and you're much more discerning about your decisions. And this has been proven in a variety of studies. So that is the power when you incorporate these types of practices into the work environment. Now we're going to switch over to athletic performance. And in some ways, that is a work environment. And we're going to have George comment on his work and how he does it to maximize peak performance in athletes.
Yes, well, it's the same process for athletes or CEOs or folks. And what a lot of people don't know, most of my work is with female athletes. I do a lot of work with college athletes. So basically, if you got to be a mindful person to be a mindful athlete. And I don't want to spend a lot of time because we don't have a lot of time. But I think I'll talk about the process that I engage in. I call it the 5 spiritual powers, but it's really more about having mindfulness and wisdom present from moment to moment. So my definition of meditation or the practice of presence is from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep. And it's really as simple as just having a brief idea of what I talked about being in a body, because you're either walking, lying down, or running, or doing whatever, and every once in a while, because you're in engagement, especially as an athlete. The thing about athletics that helps is the fact that there's a beginning, a middle, and end. Life is a marathon. There's no beginning, middle, and end. We make them, or we artificially say that there's time and stuff like that, but ultimately it's about how can I be myself in this moment. And so the process, I would say, is with a mindfulness, because I go into a lot of places, and even coming up here today, and I prepare for it, but then it's really about me being in the hub of the wheel or the eye of the hurricane, and then letting what's there speak to me. So having this sense of wonder and looking at things. So I look at it this way, is I have a pair of glasses, and mindfulness is about making sure there's no smudges on the glass so I can see clearly. And the interesting thing about it is, but I also have to know what glasses I have on, because if I have on the hate glasses, you all are in trouble, right? Because now I'm going to act out of that. If I got on the love glasses, which I have, then I'm going to be more open, and I'm going to be willing and be able to be present and say and ask, how can I be of service? And so what I do is, it's not the same with every team I work with. I work with Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and elite athletes, over in Chelsea, no matter what sport, whatever. I work with them, but it's always the same process, and that is to go in and see what's there and ask people, what do you want? And then from that, then figure out how I can help them express who they are. Because the thing about performance, and I'll talk about performance in this way, because I worked with a guy years ago, and he came to work with, he had 2 pairs of shoes, black pair and brown pair, and he came to work with 1 black shoe and 1 brown shoe. And I said, Jack, what happened? He said, well, I was getting dressed in the dark, and, this is what happened. I didn't want to wake the wife up or whatever. And I would say, without mindfulness, we're kind of like Jack in the dark. And what we want to do is be able to put some light, even if we have one of those, even if we had night vision or something, so that we could see and realize. And the interesting thing is, I guarantee you, when he was looking around, he wasn't feeling that confident, because you can't see. And so this process is about how do we bring more light into it, or at least be strategic and say, okay, I'm going to put my brown shoes over here and my black shoes over there. So the performance is to be able to go in and perform and come out with the result that you want. So that's a very succinct definition of performance. So all of us are performing one way or the other. So my expertise, they call me the performance whisperer. I just go in and say, move left, move right. But, you know, I understand the basic fundamentals. I have the wisdom, the intellect, but then I have to have the mindfulness that says, okay, this is what's there, and then what self-regulation do I have to do in order to keep adjusting until I get to where I want to go. And so when we get in the flow and when we get into the zone, that's because there's an acceptance of saying yes to life and. So, okay, so if this is what it is, then I'm going to roll with that. Like improvisation, you got to accept what's offered and then you can roll off of that. And then I would say mindfulness of this process makes us more flow ready, but if you try to get in flow, you won't. But if you just do certain things, then as a byproduct of that, it'll happen. So I don't want to spend a lot of time, but basically what I do with athletes or with everybody is about performance. What do you want? And let's see how we can get you to express yourself in a way that's compassionate, loving, and you're being helpful to yourself and others.
Thank you, George. Now, I'd like to speak with Donna and have her tell us, as many of you know, we were talking about business and how this fear, this anxiety, this stress is one of the biggest causes of disengagement at work, people leaving their jobs, people not performing, and actually huge healthcare costs. But it's also true with healthcare providers, health workers, nurses, doctors, and there's also a crisis in regard to patient care. And maybe you can give us your perception, Donna, sort of the work you've been done or have been doing, and so we can understand how powerful this can be in the healthcare environment.
I'm sorry, what was the last question you said?
How powerful these practices can be in the healthcare environment.
You know,
in
as
2 minutes.
Sorry? In what?
2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes, my
3
God. Okay, 3. As I look around this room and realize and hear everything that everyone was saying, there's no question how important meditation is, without a doubt. And then I realize it's very difficult for some people to go into meditation. You know, it's like meditation, oh, that's a woo-woo, that's a this, that's a that. I've experienced it in so many different levels. Energy is so vitally important. Is how to feel when you're with somebody and you feel an energy coming from another person. I see your smile, I see your presence, I see your passion, I feel your energy. Now, obviously you have to be open to that energy. But even if you're not, imagine yourself not feeling well, or you're having a baby. All the women who have had babies here, we're all present. That pain comes. It is so hard to be in that breath moment. You say, okay, breathe, breathe, breathe. That pain is there. So something has to be there for you, and that's what was formed as a doula. A doula who has been next to people while the nurses and the doctors are doing their job, you know where I mean. There's somebody next to you. Sometimes your husband can't handle it. Sometimes your mother can't handle it. Sometimes you're by yourself. Who is that person helping you in that process? And when my husband said to me, Donna, whatever you do, take care of the nurses, it's that nurse who is by your side, who is doing all the work, where the doctors, and God bless you, I want you to be my doctor so bad you have no idea. You know, there was a time in my younger age, then Dr. Kildare was there. And Dr. Kildare was my one and only doctor. Today I have an ear doctor, an eye doctor, a nose doctor, a mouth doctor, a lung doctor, a heart doctor, a this doctor. I have more doctors, and I have a bad memory. So I don't remember their names, which is really even more of a problem. Oh my God, in the middle of the night I need a doctor. You know, and I've been fortunate is to have somebody next to me and my husband who can guide us through the entire process. And we are all patients, every single last one of us. And I am so concerned about how we're being treated, how we're being cared for. And to take this to another dimension, this is not only here in the United States, in UCLA, in New York. We have proven that we have saved $800,000 on one floor of a hospital with better patient care. Now, you know what it's like when you're in an emergency room. Unfortunately, I was here during the Oscars. I took a fall. I was on my way to the Oscars, and I broke my elbow and my foot on my way to the Oscars. The ambulance comes in. I am screaming in pain. I mean, your elbow really hurts when you hurt it, right? And they took me to the hospital at UCLA. And there were my integrative therapists. They were at UCLA trying to find my calm in the chaos of what I was living because I was in so much pain. Okay, Donna, take a breath. Now, it's easy to say, yes, I should take a breath. But sometimes you need to be guided to take a breath. Sometimes you need it to be just held and just looked at and just loved. Love is the answer.
Exactly. Now, I don't mean to cut you off.
I know I have to cut off.
We're running out of time, and I want to hear from Laura. And
it's beautiful.
You shared a little bit, but you're a parent. Obviously, you interact with a lot of people, often in a very stressful environment. How do you see these practices have helped you in those situations in regard to, if you will, trying to be calm in the eye of the storm?
Well, I'm so grateful to listening to all of you, and Dan so beautifully laid out for us the incredible wealth of opportunities that mind-body awareness and health can bring when we integrate. So I just want to speak to what it means to integrate for me, which is the challenge of meditation and also my job as an actor. It involves allowing all the noise to come up and to just allow it to be there and watch it as it hopefully surrenders its way and you move your attention somewhere else. We're complicated beings, and it's what interests me as an actor, as a mother, as an individual, to try to embrace all of who we are, not shut away or have shame about certain thoughts, certain aspects of ourselves. And so for a lot of people, meditation at first is challenging, and they say, oh, it's scary, I have all these thoughts, I don't want to think about it. Well, that's the point of getting to a place where we start to have the ability to become aware and allow and let go to come back to the moment. So integration, I think, as part of practice, also brings us to empathy and empathy for ourselves. And for me, it's no greater gift, particularly as a mother, and to watch teenagers who practice meditation in their life is incredible. Please do it for yourselves somehow. Present to children and teens this opportunity. There's so much depression and so much challenge in embracing self in young people these days, maybe more than ever, and it's an incredible gift to continue offering young people in this world as well.
So I think what you've seen, we've talked about, and to summarize that, and I'm sorry, I don't think we're going to have much time for questions, but we will be available off to the side here shortly. But the way I would like to summarize this is, one, you have the power within you. Two, it is a choice between fear and love. Being closed down, being frightened, or being open, accepting, non-judgmental, inclusive. And when you choose that path, everything changes, not only for yourself, but for everyone around you. So thank you all so much. It's been a joy, and thank you to our panelists.
Good pleasure.
Thank you. So nice of you.